She had one job: keep her head down, survive her first week, and never, ever drop anything in front of Kang Min-ho. She failed at the third one in exactly 47 seconds. The files hit the marble floor like confession, scattering across his custom Italian shoes. And when she looked up, she found the most dangerous man in Seoul looking down at her like she had just done the most interesting thing anyone had done to him in years. She was trembling. He was not. And something ancient and terrible woke up behind his eyes in that silence. Something that had no name yet, but already knew hers. Welcome to Afrokorean Central, Besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. The Kang Group headquarters occupied the top 14 floors of the most expensive building in the Gangnam district, and everyone who worked there understood one rule before they understood anything else. You did not look Kang Min-ho directly in the eye. You did not speak to him unless spoken to. You did not exist too loudly in his presence. He was 38 years old, the son of a man who had built a legitimate empire over decades and a quiet architect of an underground network that made prosecutors lose sleep. He had a face that belonged in museums and eyes that belonged in interrogation rooms, and he moved through his own building like the walls themselves were grateful he was there. Rose Adeyemi had been in Seoul for exactly 6 days when she walked into all of that. She was 26, fresh from Lagos by way of London, hired on a 6-month internship in Kang Group's International Acquisitions Division because her thesis on West African economic corridors had apparently impressed someone important enough to make a phone call. She was 5'6" of nervous energy and natural hair and a competence that had gotten her through every room she had ever walked into except this one. This one had different gravity. She felt it the second she stepped off the elevator on the 12th floor, and the entire open-plan office went 30% quieter. The files were supposed to go to the executive conference room on the 14th floor. 47 pages of consolidated acquisition reports that her supervisor, a tightly wound woman named Manager O, had pressed into her hands with instructions so precise they had bordered on a threat. Do not crease them. Do not be late. Do not stop for anything. Rose had not stopped. She had simply turned a corner at exactly the wrong moment. And the corner had contained Kang Min-ho. He was not supposed to be on the 12th floor. Nobody had mentioned that he sometimes came down when he needed to remind people that no floor of this building was truly safe from him. He was flanked by 2 men in dark suits who were clearly armed and clearly not surprised by anything. And he was reading something on his phone, and he had absolutely no reason to stop walking. Neither did Rose. But the universe had other plans, and the files went everywhere. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 4 seconds. To Rose, it felt like a geography. She was already on the floor before she had processed dropping to it, gathering pages with hands that were steady only because she had decided somewhere in the last half-second that she was not going to let this break her. She stacked quickly, efficiently, not looking up, because looking up was not something she was ready to survive yet. Then a hand appeared, large, unhurried, holding 3 pages that slid the furthest across the marble. She looked at the hand. Then she looked up. Kang Min-ho was crouching at her level, which was something she suspected he almost never did for anyone, holding her pages with the same focused attention he probably gave to financial projections and people he was deciding what to do with. His face was close enough that she could see the exact quality of his stillness, which was not the stillness of patience, but the stillness of a predator who had just decided something. "Thank you," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of her voice. He handed her the pages. His eyes did not leave her face. He said nothing. He stood. He walked away without looking back, and his men followed him, and the 12th floor exhaled. Rose sat on the marble floor for another 2 seconds, files in her arms, and told herself that her heart was racing because she had almost ruined an important document delivery, and not for any other reason. She was lying to herself. She would not admit that for another 3 weeks. That evening, Min-ho sat in his private office on the 14th floor and reviewed the security footage from the 12th floor corridor. He watched it twice. Then he called his head of operations, a man named Director Choi, who had worked for the Kang family for 22 years and had learned to read his employer's questions before they were asked. The intern, Min-ho said, the one from acquisitions. Full background. By tomorrow morning. Director Choi did not ask why. He said yes, sir, and ended the call. Min-ho turned his chair to face the window, and looked out at Seoul glittering in the dark. He was not accustomed to noticing people. He had trained himself out of it years ago because noticing people meant caring what happened to them. And caring what happened to people was a vulnerability he could not afford in the life he had built. He had built that life with extraordinary care and absolute discipline, and it served him exactly as he intended. He hadn't noticed the intern. He told himself it was because she had not apologized when most people would have been begging for forgiveness. He told himself it was because her eyes had been steady when she finally looked up at him, and steadiness in the presence of someone like him was either stupidity or courage, and he had a professional interest in determining which. He told himself many things. Most of them were incomplete. The next morning, the background file arrived on his desk before he had finished his first coffee. Rose Adeyemi, 26, dual national, economics degree from the London School of Economics with distinction. Her thesis had been shortlisted for 2 academic prizes. She had applied for the Kang Group internship through proper channels, had gone through 4 rounds of assessment, and had been recommended without reservation. No red flags, no hidden connections, no agenda that his people could find. He read the file. He looked at her photograph, which had been taken from her identification badge, and was not remotely flattering and still managed to be striking. He closed the file. He set it in the drawer. He told himself he was done thinking about it. He was not done thinking about it. By the end of the week, Rose had settled into a routine that she would later describe to her best friend Adiz back in Lagos as controlled chaos wearing a designer suit. The 12th floor was full of people who were professionally pleasant and personally terrified, not of their work, but the possibility that something they did might ripple upward and attract the wrong kind of attention. Rose had survived 2 all-hands briefings, one near disaster involving a translation error in a Korean acquisition document, and a highly unpleasant interaction with a senior associate named Park who had a habit of treating interns like furniture that had been delivered to the wrong address. She had not seen Kang Min-ho again. She was grateful for this. She was also, in a way she was not examining too closely, aware of his absence in the same way you are aware of a storm that has passed through your neighborhood and left everything rearranged. Her desk was near the windows. She liked this because the light was good and because it meant she could watch Seoul go about its enormous, complicated business without being obvious about it. She worked late most evenings, not because she was trying to impress anyone, but because the work was genuinely interesting and the apartment or company housing provided was too quiet in a way that made her feel the distance from home more acutely. It was on a Thursday, 12 days after the file incident, that she heard his voice for the second time. The quarterly briefing had run 20 minutes over, and she was gathering her notes in the emptying conference room when the door opened, and he walked in with Director Choi and 2 other men she did not recognize. He stopped when he saw that the room was not fully empty. His gaze found her immediately, the way a compass finds north, and Rose felt the specific physics of his attention like a change in air pressure. She gathered her notes faster. The international acquisitions intern, Director Choi said, with the practiced neutrality of a man who had learned that providing information was safer than allowing silences to fill themselves. Min-ho said nothing for a moment. His eyes remained on Rose, who had straightened to her full height, and met his gaze with the steady expression she had perfected somewhere between the floor of the 12th floor corridor and now. The West African Economic Corridors paper, he said. It was you. It was a statement, not a question. Rose blinked. Yes, she said. Her voice was careful. He seemed to consider something. His expression had not changed in any way she could identify, but something in his posture had shifted, like he had made a small internal note. Read it, he said, and walked to the head of the table. She left. She did not let herself think about what read it meant until she was in the elevator, and then she let herself think about it very briefly. And then she stopped because the elevator doors were opening and she had work to do. The following Monday, a copy of her thesis arrived on her desk with a note clipped to the front. The note contained 3 lines of handwritten Korean that her colleague, a friendly woman named Ji-yeon, translated for her over lunch. He agreed with your analysis on the port access corridors, but questions your assumption about regulatory alignment in Ghana. It says to prepare a response brief. For who? Rose asked. Ji-yeon looked at the handwriting for a moment. Then she looked at Rose with an expression that was half envy and half something she could not name. For him, she said. Rose spent that evening preparing the best response brief of her life. It came back 2 days later with 3 more questions. This continued for a week and a half. This silent academic conversation conducted entirely through notes and documents, and Rose found herself doing something she had not expected to do in this building, which was look forward to coming in. Not because she was close to Min-ho in any tangible sense, but because the questions were genuinely intelligent and the engagement was genuinely challenging, and somewhere in the back of her mind, in the part she was not examining, she was aware that someone powerful was paying attention to her thinking, and she did not entirely hate it. She would have liked it better if she did not keep finding his eyes on her. When she looked up, it was Ji-yeon who told her, in a low voice over their Monday lunch, that Kang Min-ho had never in the 6 years she had worked on the 12th floor once engaged directly with Intern. Not once, Ji-yeon said, with the emphasis of someone reporting a historical aberration. He doesn't do this. Whatever this is. Rose looked at her tray. He's interested in the research, she said. Ji-yeon gave her the look that people give when they're being kind enough not to say something obvious. She ate her soup and changed the subject, and Rose told herself Ji-yeon was misreading a professional situation, and she almost believed it. That afternoon, she was called to the 14th floor for the first time. The 14th floor was different from the floors below in the way a cathedral is different from the buildings around it, not just in scale, but in atmosphere, in what it asks of you the moment you step into it. Everything up here was darker, quieter, more deliberate. The wood was real. The silence had weight. The people who moved through it moved like they understood the cost of existing in this space and had accepted it. Min-ho's office was at the far end, behind a door that the executive assistant opened for Rose without a word. She walked in. He was standing at the window. This seemed to be a habit. He turned when she entered, and for the first time, they were alone in a room together, which was different from the corridor and different from the conference room. Rose was aware of the difference in a way that she kept her face carefully neutral about. Your brief was thorough, he said, crossing to his desk. He sat down. He gestured at the chair across from him. She sat. On the Ghana regulatory alignment, your counter-argument is persuasive, but you haven't accounted for the political transition risk in the next 18 months. She had, actually. She said so. She walked him through her supplementary analysis, which she had prepared because she had suspected this was where the conversation would go, and she watched his expression as she talked, because his expression was where the information was. He was listening in a complete way, the way that required all of him, and it was deeply unsettling and not entirely for reasons she could have explained professionally. They talked for 40 minutes. He pushed back on 3 of her conclusions. She held her ground on 2 of them and conceded the third because he was right about it. And she was not in the habit of being stubborn about things where someone was right. When she stood to leave, he said, "Same time Thursday." It was not a question. She said yes, and left, and walked back to the elevator with her notebook pressed against her chest and her thoughts in an arrangement she was not ready to examine. Same time Thursday happened, and the Thursday after that, and then a Tuesday when something had shifted in his schedule, and he needed to reroute the conversation earlier, and his assistant had called down to ask if she was available, as if her availability was something that needed asking about rather than assuming. She was always available. She told herself this was because the work was important. She told herself this with increasing frequency and decreasing conviction. The danger arrived on a Wednesday, as danger often does, without warning and from a direction she was not watching. His name was Seo Hyun-jae. He was 32, attractive in an aggressive and obvious way, and he was the head of a rival acquisitions firm that had been circling several of the same opportunities the Kang Group was pursuing. He attended an industry mixer that Rose's division had been sent to as part of the professional development protocol, and he found her within 20 minutes of the event starting, which was either impressive or strategic, and probably both. He was interesting, she had to admit. He was funny and direct, and genuinely knowledgeable about the West African markets she had written about. And for 2 hours, she had a real conversation at an industry event, which was not something she had managed to do since arriving in Seoul. He asked for her number at the end of the evening. She hesitated. He smiled. "Just for a professional conversation," he said. The smile suggested he meant more than that and was allowing her to decide. She gave him her card. It was a professional card. It had her work email and her work phone. She told herself this was networking. She did not know that two of the men she had taken for industry professionals standing near the bar had been taking note of the entire conversation for someone who had requested regular updates on her whereabouts and interactions, not because he was surveilling her in a threatening way, but because Director Choi had noticed something in his employer's manner that he had never seen before and had quietly extended the standard protective observation that senior executives received to include the International Acquisitions Intern. Director Choi was very good at his job. The next morning, Min-ho arrived in his office to find a brief summary in his daily report. He read it once. His expression did not change. He set the report aside and picked up his phone and made 3 calls about a separate matter and then stood at his window for 4 minutes longer than he usually did. He was jealous. He did not use this word for it. He did not have a comfortable word for any of what had been happening over the past several weeks, because jealousy implied caring, and caring implied vulnerability, and he had spent 20 years building a life in which vulnerability had no structural role. But his jaw was tight in a way that it was not usually tight, and when Seo Hyun-jae's name appeared on a separate report 2 hours later in the context of a potentially overlapping acquisition opportunity, Min-ho moved on that opportunity with a speed and aggression that Director Choi privately noted was disproportionate to the financial stakes. He did not say this. He never said anything that Kang Min-ho had not chosen to hear. He simply managed the operation and watched and waited and trusted that whatever this was would reveal itself in time. On Thursday, Rose arrived on the 14th floor at the usual time and found Min-ho already at his desk, which was normal, but with a quality of stillness that was sharper than usual, which was not. She sat. She opened her notes. She was about to begin when he said, without looking up from whatever he was reading, "I heard you attended the acquisitions mixer on Wednesday." "Yes," she said. "The division sent several of us." He looked up then. His eyes were doing the assessment thing. She was becoming more capable of reading it, which was dangerous information to have. Seo Hyun-jae was there, he said. It was not exactly a question. Rose met his gaze. "He was," she said. "Do you know him?" A pause that was not quite comfortable. "I know his firm. He has a habit of targeting opportunities that aren't his to pursue." Rose held his gaze. "Are you talking about the acquisition in Accra?" He looked at her for a moment longer than the professional context required. "Among other things," he said, and returned to his papers and said, "Let's talk about the political transition analysis." They spent the next hour on work. But the air in the room was different, and Rose was not certain enough of her own perception to say exactly how, only that something had been present in the conversation that had not been named and had not gone away. Seo Hyun-jae called her work phone the following Friday. She took the call in the small kitchenette near the acquisitions floor because the conversation was personal, not professional, and she preferred to keep those things separate. He wanted to have coffee. He said it in a way that was direct without being pressuring, and she liked that about him, his directness. She had been in Seoul for nearly 5 weeks, and she was lonely in a way that competent, self-sufficient people are lonely, which is quietly and without complaint. She said yes. Saturday afternoon. She told nobody about this at the office. It was not the office's business. Director Choi's report the following Monday mentioned the coffee meeting in 3 lines. Min-ho read those 3 lines once. He set the report face down on his desk. He called Director Choi. "The Accra opportunity," he said. "I want it locked before end of month. Whatever it takes." Director Choi said yes, sir, and ended the call and noted privately that the Accra opportunity had been tracking at a comfortable pace for 6 weeks, and that nothing had changed in past 48 hours to justify the acceleration except one line item in a social observation report. He was very good at his job, and he kept all of this to himself. On Tuesday, Min-ho appeared on the 12th floor without warning or announcement, which he was entitled to do and did occasionally, but which always had the effect of sending the entire floor into a state of professional hypervigilance. He was reviewing something with the acquisitions department head when he paused near Rose's desk. She was on the phone, working through a translation discrepancy in a Nairobi-linked contract with a legal consultant in Nairobi. She was not performing competence. She was simply competent, and she was too focused on the call to notice him standing nearby until she had finished and looked up. He was already looking at her. He was holding a document he had no reason to hold near her desk. "Good call," he said. "Neutral. Professional. She looked at him and said thank you and looked back at her screen, and he walked away. And Ji-yeon, from across the room, gave Rose a look that Rose refused to acknowledge. That evening, a gift arrived at her desk just before she left. It was not wrapped. It was a printed copy of an academic paper by an economist she had referenced 3 times in her thesis, with a handwritten note attached that said supplementary reading. The handwriting was the same handwriting from the notes on her thesis. She looked at the paper. She looked at the note. She set both very carefully in her bag and went home and sat in her too-quiet apartment and read the paper from beginning to end, which took 2 hours, and thought about a man who had given her an academic paper, as though it were flowers, and had probably no idea that it was more effective than flowers would have been. She did not allow this thought to go anywhere productive. A few days later, Seo Hyun-jae sent her a message asking if she might be interested in attending a gallery opening on Thursday evening. It was a real gallery, a real opening, a cultural event. She looked at the message for a moment. She thought about what Ji-yeon had said, and then she thought about what she had said in return, and then she thought about the academic paper that was sitting on her nightstand. She told Hyun-jae she would think about it. She did not respond further before Thursday. On Thursday, she arrived on the 14th floor for her usual session and found Min-ho in a state she had not seen before. He was on a call when she came in, standing by the window, speaking in Korean too rapid for her to follow, and his posture had the quality of something held at significant personal cost. He ended the call when she entered, turned, and the expression on his face was controlled but barely. Something had gone wrong. She could see it in the set of his jaw and the precise way he was holding himself. She sat down. She said nothing and opened her notes and gave him room to arrive at himself. He sat down across from her a moment later. The acquisition in Accra, he said. There's been interference. Someone moved on the regulatory relationship I had been building with the Ghanaian ministry. The timing is deliberate. Seo Hyun-jae, she said. He looked at her. She could read enough of his face now to know that he had not expected her to get there that fast. Likely, he said, his firm has been positioning against us on 3 deals this quarter. She absorbed this. Then she said, I had coffee with him Saturday. You should know that. His expression did not change by any visible measurement, but the quality of the stillness in the room increased. I am not sharing information with him. She continued, steadily. I have not discussed any Kang group matters. I want that clear. He held her gaze for a moment that lasted slightly longer than necessary. I know that, he said. His voice was flat and very controlled. She understood from the flatness that it was costing him something to be controlled. She understood also that she should not examine too closely what that implied. She did not attend the gallery opening. She told Hyun-jae she had prior commitments, which was true in the sense that she had prior commitments to her own sanity. The catalyst came 2 weeks later, from a direction no one had been watching. There had been rumors in the industry press about Kang Group's underground operations for years. This was not unusual. Men like Kang Min-ho attracted stories the way storms attracted water. Most of them were exaggerated and some of them were not, and the specific geometry of what was true and what was construct was something Rose had thought carefully about in the way you think carefully about something that has implications for a decision you are not yet ready to make. The article that appeared on a Tuesday morning was different. It named her, not prominently, not in a way that was the story, but she was mentioned by name as an international intern at Kang Group, in a context that implied she was part of an international network being used to establish financial cover in West African regulatory frameworks. The implication was buried in the middle of a longer piece about Kang Group's overseas operations, sourced to an unnamed insider, clearly designed to do damage that could be plausibly denied. She read it on her phone at her desk and sat very still for 45 seconds. Then Manager O appeared and told her she was wanted on the 14th floor immediately. The walk-up felt longer than usual. Min-ho was standing when she came in, not at the window this time, but in the center of the room, and Director Choi was present along with 2 people she had not seen before who had the energy of legal counsel. He looked at her when she entered with an expression she could not fully read because there were too many things in it at once, and none of them with professional neutrality she was used to navigating. You saw the article, he said. Yes. It is fabricated. His voice was very precise. Every implication regarding your role in this organization is false, and we know the source." He looked at Director Choi, who gave a small nod. "A correction will be issued through our legal team by end of day, and a formal complaint has been filed. Your name will not appear in relation to this again." She looked at him. "Why would someone put my name in there?" His jaw tightened. "Because your name creates a credible international dimension to a story they're trying to tell about our overseas expansion. And because someone believed it would cause disruption internally." He paused. "It will not." She stood there and processed this. The part of her brain that was good at assembling information had already identified the shape of the thing. Someone had used her as a tool to try to damage him. The specific damage they were trying to do required her to be associated with him in a way that implied more than professional engagement. She thought about what Ji-yeon had said. She thought about the academic paper on her nightstand. She thought about the quality of the stillness in this room every Thursday for the past 6 weeks. She said, "Thank you for handling it quickly." Her voice was careful. He looked at her. "Are you all right?" he said, and the question was so direct and so uncharacteristic of everything else about his manner that she felt it land in a place she had been keeping guarded. "I'm fine," she said. "I'm angry, but I'm fine." Something crossed his face. "Good," he said. "Be angry. You're entitled to it." She left. She went back to the 12th floor, and she sat at her desk, and she did the work in front of her with concentrated precision. And that evening she went home and called Adiz and Lagos and said, "I think I am in a situation, and I am not entirely sure how I got here." Adiz, who knew her better than anyone, said, "Does he look at you?" Rose was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. Adiz said, "Then you know how you got there." The correction was published by end of day as promised. By the following morning, 3 industry publications had run clarifying pieces. The source of the original story was identified within 48 hours through channels that Rose did not ask about, and the name that surfaced was someone connected to CEO Hyun-jae's firm. Not Hyun-jae himself, but close enough to make the implication clear. Min-ho did not discuss the fallout with Rose directly, but on Wednesday, a package arrived at her desk, not a document this time. A traditional Korean tea set, high quality, the kind that took research to choose correctly. The note said, "For the evenings when Seoul is too quiet." Ji-yeon, from across the room, stopped pretending to work. She looked at the tea set. She looked at Rose. She looked at the ceiling, as though seeking guidance from something beyond the drop tiles. Rose put the tea set in her bag and said nothing and kept working. Her face was steady. Her heart was doing something she chose not to annotate. That evening, she made herself tea in the apartment and sat by the window and looked at Seoul and allowed herself, for the first time, to examine what was actually happening, not the professional surface of it, but the part underneath. She was developing feelings for a man who ran an empire with a visible side and a less visible side, who was feared by people with good reasons for fear, who watched over her in ways she had only recently fully understood, who asked her questions as though her answers were genuinely the most important date in the room, and who had sent her a tea set because she had mentioned once, in passing, weeks ago, that she sometimes felt the distance from home in the evenings. This was reckless. She knew it was reckless. She was a sensible person from a sensible family who had gotten where she was through discipline and good judgment and the specific refusal to be derailed by things that felt good but were complicated. She poured a second cup and kept thinking. The danger that changed everything arrived not as a slow build, but as a sudden violent rupture. The way genuine danger always arrives when you have lowered your guard by precisely 1 degree. It was a Friday evening, 7 weeks into her internship, and Rose had stayed late because the Nairobi contract had developed a new complexity that needed resolution before the weekend. The 12th floor had emptied by 8. The cleaning staff had come and gone. She was alone at her desk with cold coffee and the particular focused energy of someone who knows they are close to solving something and cannot leave it unfinished. She did not hear them come in. She heard them only when they were already at the elevator bank. For men in the kind of clothing designed not to be remembered, and she understood immediately from the way they moved and the way they looked at her across the empty floor that they had not come for the building. They had come for her. She stood. The rational part of her mind, the part that had gotten her through every difficult thing, began assessing exit routes with the same efficiency it applied to contract analysis. The stairwell behind her, The distance, the probability of reaching it before they crossed the floor. The numbers did not resolve in her favor. She did not run. Running would cost her the seconds she needed to use the only weapon she actually had, which was her phone. She called the number she had not expected to ever call, the one that had been given to her by Director Choi 3 weeks earlier under the heading of Security Protocol for Senior Consultants, which is what she had technically been classified as after the article incident. Min-ho answered on the first ring. 12th floor, she said. 4 men. I did not know who sent them. Her voice was steady. She was enormously proud of her voice in this moment. There was a half-second of silence, and then he said, "Move toward the southeast stairwell and do not stop moving." His voice was the flattest she had ever heard it, which she understood now meant he was the most serious. She moved. She had gotten 12 steps toward the stairwell when one of the men said her name. Not Miss Adeyemi, not the intern, just Rose, which meant they knew her specifically and had been given that information by someone who had a reason to use her name. She pushed through the stairwell door. She heard the floor behind her come alive with sound. She went down 2 flights and stopped at the 10th floor landing because the stairwell below her had a sound she did not trust. And she pushed through the 10th floor door and moved into the corridor and kept moving. They found her in 4 minutes. It felt like less. There were 2 of them now, the other 2 presumably handling something she could not see. One of them put a hand on her arm, and she turned toward her with precision that surprised him long enough for her to be loud, very loud, in a building that was not as empty as it appeared. Because Min-ho's building ran 3 security rotations overnight, and the sound of a woman's voice carrying through an otherwise quiet corridor triggered the nearest rotation in 45 seconds. It was 45 seconds. She did not entirely have to spare, but almost did. Min-ho came through the east elevator 40 seconds after the security team secured the 2 men in the corridor. He came through the doors moving at a pace that was technically not running, but was everything running as except the form, and he crossed the corridor to where she was standing with a security officer, and his eyes went over her with the rapid, total assessment of someone checking for damage before they allow themselves anything else. "Are you hurt?" he said. Not a question. A demand. "No," she said. He looked at her for another full second. Then he put both hands on her shoulders, not hard, not restraining, just present. And the contact was so unexpected and so different from anything that had existed between them for the past 7 weeks that she felt it go through her entirely. He was looking at her face. She was looking at his. "You called me," he said. "You were the right call," she said. Something shifted behind his eyes. Director Choi appeared at the end of the corridor with more security staff, and a moment closed the way moments do when they are interrupted before they become what they were becoming, and Min-ho stepped back and became a controlled, managing version of himself again, and began directing the situation with a flat, precise authority she had seen him use in conference rooms, except that the stakes were different and the control quality of his manner had a different quality underneath it. She stood in the corridor and breathed. The men were connected to a faction within the industry opposition to a regulatory position Kang Group had been advancing, not to Seo Hyun-jae specifically, though the investigation would take 2 more days to confirm this. They had intended to use Rose as leverage, the same mechanics as the article, but physical this time, a demonstration that Kang Group's international operations had an accessible vulnerability. Min-ho understood what they had identified as a vulnerability before Director Choi finished explaining it to him, because he had identified it himself several weeks earlier and had made the deliberate and unusual choice not to resolve in the way he usually resolved vulnerabilities, which was to eliminate them. He had instead extended security protocols and watched and told himself this was strategic. He was not going to tell himself that any longer. Later that night, after the formal security debrief, after the legal consultants had been briefed, after the arrangements for the detained men had been made through channels Rose did not ask about, Min-ho found her in the small conference room where she had been waiting. The building was quiet in the way buildings are quiet very late at night. All contained breath and empty hallways. She was sitting at the conference table with her hands around a cup of tea someone had brought her, looking out the window at the city. She heard him come in. She did not turn immediately. He sat down across from her. He did not begin with procedural language. He said, "I need to tell you something." She turned to look at him. "I have known for several weeks that your association with this building and with me personally has made you a target," he said. His voice was level, but the quality underneath it was not. I made a calculation that extending security protocols was sufficient mitigation. That calculation was wrong, and it put you at risk, and I am telling you that directly because you're entitled to know it. She looked at him for a moment. She said, "You're apologizing." "I am telling you the truth," he said. "For you, those might be the same thing," she said, and she did not say it unkindly. He absorbed this. The room was very still. Outside, Seoul continued its vast and different work. He said, "You have the right to request a transfer to another division, a remote arrangement, or early completion of your contract with a full letter of recommendation and no penalty. I will support whatever you decide." She looked at her tea. She looked at him. She said, "Is that what you want?" He held her gaze for a long moment. His jaw moved slightly, the way it moved when he was deciding something. "No," he said. She waited. "I want you safe," he said, "which means I want whoever is targeting you to no longer have reason or opportunity to do so, which means I want to deal with the situation in the way I know how to deal with situations. And it also means," he paused, and the pause was different from his usual pauses, "it also means I do not want you to leave." She was quiet for a moment that stretched and held. Then she said, "I'm not going to leave." He looked at her. "Not because I can't," she said, "because I don't want to. And I need you to understand the difference." She looked at him steadily. "I came here for the work, and I have stayed for the work, and I am not going to be chased out of it. But I am also not an idiot." She looked at her hands briefly. "I know what's been happening between us. I have been choosing not to know it explicitly because it is complicated, and I am not someone who does complicated without thinking it through." He said nothing. She continued, "So here's where I am." She looked at him directly. "I think you are one of the most interesting people I have encountered, and that is not something I say with ease. I think you have been paying attention to me in ways that are not entirely professional, and I think I have been paying attention to you in ways that are not entirely professional, and I think we have both been very careful about not saying so." She paused. "I am saying so now, because people just tried to use me as a tool against you, and I think if we're going to navigate whatever this actually is, we should do it honestly." Min-ho looked at her across the conference table with the expression she had been cataloging for 7 weeks, the one that had no precedent to face. He showed the rest of his world, the one that was simply him, without the architecture. He said, "I have not known how to do this." She said, "I'm aware of that." He said, "I do not have a good history of doing this." She said, "I'm also aware of that." A pause. He said, "And you are still here." She said, "I told you, I don't leave because of things being complicated." He stood. He came around the table, and he stood near her, not crowding, not performing, just present the way he was present when he had decided something. She looked up at him. "There are things about my world you would have to know," he said. "Things you might not choose if you knew them fully." "Tell me," she said. He told her. Not everything, not in one conversation, but the shape of it, the honest geometry, the legitimate empire and the less legitimate infrastructure it had grown from, the things his father had built and the things he had continued, and the things he had been slowly and deliberately restructuring over the past 4 years because he had come to understand that the life he had inherited was not the life he would have chosen, but that changing it required doing it from the inside, and doing it carefully, and not doing it in a way that left the people who depended on his organization without the protection they had built their lives around. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "You're trying to get out. I am trying to make something different," he said. "It is slower than getting out. It may take longer than I originally calculated." She thought about this. She thought about the kind of man who restructures an empire from the inside, because it is the responsible way to do it, versus the kind of man who simply leaves and lets the wreckage fall on whoever cannot move fast enough. She thought about the academic papers and the tea set, and the 45 seconds in the corridor, and his hands on her shoulders, checking whether she was hurt before he allowed himself anything else. She said, "I'm not going anywhere." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said her name, which he had never said before, just her name, Rose, in a way that made the simple word carry more than it usually carried. She stood up. They were very close in the conference room at 2 a.m. with Seoul outside, and the weight of everything that had been said still in the air. He said, "I need you to know that what I feel is not something I'm accustomed to feeling." "I know," she said. He said, "It is not going to be simple." "I know that too," she said. He reached up and his hand found the side of her face with the same careful precision he brought to everything, and she did not move away. And for a moment they simply stayed in that, in the honesty of it, in the fact of it. And then he kissed her, and she kissed him back. And what followed was not simple, and was not complicated in the way either of them had feared, and was in the quiet of it, in the warmth of it, in the specificity of choosing each other in a room at 2 in the morning with the whole messy reality of their lives fully acknowledged. Exactly right. She was gone when he woke. The suite he had arranged for her security overnight was empty, the bed made, her bag gone. He found her note on the pillow, and he had not expected the note, and he stood in the doorway of the empty room and read it twice. The note said, "I panicked. I'm sorry. I will be at my desk at 8. Please don't let this be something I regret." He was dressed in 4 minutes. He found her not at her desk, but in the lobby of her apartment building, just arriving, her bag over her shoulder, looking like a person who had walked from the building to a taxi in the small hours of the morning and spent the journey between telling herself a series of things she did not fully believe. She turned when she heard him come through the lobby door, and the look on her face was not surprise. She had known he would come. She had been afraid, and she had come here anyway, and she had, in some part of herself, been waiting. He stood 6 feet from her. He said, "You wrote, 'Please don't let this be something I regret.'" She said, "I meant it." He said, "Then stay. Whatever comes next, stay and we will figure out correctly." She looked at him. She said, "You drove here yourself." He said, "Director Choi has a morning off." She said, "You never drive yourself." He said, "I needed to get here before you talk yourself into something that was not true." She stood there in the lobby and looked at him. This man who had driven across Seoul before sunrise because she had written please and a note on a pillow, and she thought about recklessness and about discipline and about the specific kind of courage it takes to want something fully instead of protecting yourself from it. She said, "Okay." He said, "Okay." She said, "But I have to be at my desk at 8. I have the Nairobi contract." He said, "I know. I'll have someone bring breakfast." She said, "You're going to be very inconvenient to have feelings for." He said, "Yes." He said it without apology and with the first complete smile she had ever seen on his face, and it was, as she had suspected it might be, completely devastating. The weeks that followed were not simple. This had been established clearly, and they both held to it without pretending otherwise. There were conversations that required honesty on levels that neither of them found comfortable. There were moments where the distance between his world and the world she had grown up in was a real distance with real implications. There were nights where she lay awake thinking about all of it and reached no resolution, and mornings where she came in and saw him across the 14th floor, and the resolution presented itself quietly and without fanfare in a way that real things do. He was changed by her in ways that were visible to the people around him before they were visible to him. Director Choi noted it. The senior legal team noted it. Manager O on the 12th floor, who had worked at Kong Group for 11 years and considered herself an authority on the man's moods, noted it within a week. He was not softer, exactly. He was more deliberate, less reactive and more considered. He took one meeting that had been on the schedule for 4 years and restructured it with a directness that indicated he had made a decision he had been deferring, a step in the restructuring process he had been describing to Rose, taken sooner than he had planned because he had told her about it, and telling her had made the path clearer. She was changed, too, in ways she cataloged with the same honesty she brought to everything. She stopped treating Seoul as a temporary address. She enrolled in a Korean language class. She brought photographs from home and put them on her desk. She had dinner with Ji-eun twice and with the broader acquisitions team once, because she had understood somewhere in the past 2 months that belonging somewhere required choosing it. She chose it. The threat did not leave cleanly. Threats rarely do in the world Min-ho operated in. The faction that had sent the 4 men on a Friday night made a second attempt, not against Rose this time, but against a component of the Kong Group legal infrastructure that connected to the restructuring Min-ho had been advancing. It was sophisticated and it very nearly worked. And the 3 weeks of managing it were 3 weeks during which Rose watched Min-ho from close proximity operate under the kind of pressure that reveals exactly who a person is. What she saw did not surprise her. It confirmed what she already understood, which was that he was exactly the person he had shown her he was. No performance, no management, just a person. He fought hard and cleanly for the things that were his to protect. He drew lines he would not cross. He was in the difficult process of becoming something his father had not been, doing it at cost, doing it with the specific patience of someone who understood that real change is slow and the impatience for quick results is how things get broken. She was there for the morning the resolution came through. She was on the 14th floor for a different reason, reviewing the final version of the Nairobi contract with the legal team, and she saw his face when Director Choi gave him the news, and she saw exactly what it meant to him, not just strategically but personally. The particular relief of a person who's been doing a hard right thing for a long time and has finally gotten a confirmation that it was worth doing. She crossed the room when the legal team had dispersed. She stood next to him at the window where he always stood. Below them, Seoul conducted its enormous daily business without knowing or caring about any of what had just resolved. She said, "How are you?" He said, "Better than I expected." She said, "That's allowed." He turned to look at her. He said, "I want to do something." He said it in the way he said things he had thought through completely. "I want to make this official." He looked at her. "Us. Publicly. In whatever way that needs to happen." She said, "That sounds like you're describing a press release." He said, "I am trying to say that I want people to know you are mine, and I want to know that I am yours." "You are appalling at this." He said, "I know. I have been told." She said, "You've never said that before." "I have said very few of the things I should have said. I intend to correct this." She looked at him for a moment. She said, "You're serious." "I have never been less serious about anything." She said, "There will be complications." "There have been complications from the beginning. We have managed them correctly." She said, "My mother is going to have a great deal of opinions. I would like to meet your mother. I would like to meet your family." He said this with the directness of a man who has made a complete decision and is not going to be walked backward from it. "I want to understand where you come from because it made you who you are, and who you are is the most interesting thing that has happened to me in more years than I am willing to count." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "This is the most you have ever said in one continuous stretch." He said, "I have been practicing." She said, "In your head?" "For approximately 6 weeks." She looked out at Seoul. She thought about Lagos and London, and the thesis that had gotten her here, and the file that had scattered across marble, and the 47 seconds that had rearranged the geometry of everything. She thought about all of it with the clear-eyed honesty that was her primary way of being in the world. "Okay," she said it the way she had said in the lobby at sunrise, fully and without reservation. He said, "Okay." And then he took her hand at the window on the 14th floor of the Kang Group building with Seoul below them, and the afternoon light doing what it did in the city, which was to make everything look like it had been arranged by someone who understood the relationship between light and consequence. And it was simple, it was not simple, and it was entirely right. The formal announcement was not a press release. It was dinner, his family's home, her in a dress she had bought specifically for the occasion, and him in a suit that fit in the way his suits always fit him, and a quality of nervousness he would not name, but which he found unexpectedly endearing. His mother was a small, sharp woman who looked at Rose for approximately 40 seconds before deciding something and spending the rest of the evening being warm in a way that was specific and not performed. His younger brother spent the dinner asking her questions about West African economic frameworks with the concentrated enthusiasm of a recent graduate student, which he was. She called her mother from the taxi on the way back. Her mother, a woman of significant opinions and even more significant warmth, asked 17 questions in 12 minutes, made 2 observations that were each correct in different ways, and then said, "He came to dinner with his family?" Rose said, "Yes." Her mother said, "Then he is serious." Rose said, "I know." Her mother said, "Bring him here. I want to look at him." Rose said, "Mama." Her mother said, "I am your mother, and I want to look at the man and decide for myself. This is not a negotiation." 3 months later, Min-ho sat in the living room of the Adeyemi family home in Lagos and was looked at by Rose's mother with the specific thorough attention of a woman who had raised Rose and therefore had an extremely high standard and absolutely no intention of pretending otherwise. He sat straight and answered everything directly and accepted the jollof rice with the focus of someone who understood that how you receive food tells a person something important about your character. He was assessed for 4 days. He passed in ways that were also not announced directly, but were communicated through particular warmth with which Rose's mother began including him in conversations as though he had always been there, which was, Rose explained to him privately, the highest available rating. On the third evening, Rose's father, a quiet man who spoke less than anyone in the household and noticed more, found Min-ho on the veranda after dinner looking out at the neighborhood with the expression Rose recognized as him being fully present somewhere. Her father sat beside him. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Then her father said, "You understand what you are asking of her." Not a question. Min-ho said, "I am still learning the full dimensions of it." He said it honestly. He said, "I know that my life will require things of her that are not ordinary, and I know she knows this, and I know she has chosen it with full information." He paused. "I am doing everything in my capacity to make it worth choosing." Rose's father was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She is the best of us. Handle her correctly." Min-ho said, "Yes, sir." Her father went back inside. Min-ho sat on the veranda until Rose came to find him, which she did after 15 minutes, bringing 2 bottles of cold water and sitting next to him in the warm Lagos evening. She said, "What did he say?" He said, "He told me you are the best of them." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "I am." He said, "I know." She looked at him sideways. He was looking out at the neighborhood. She said, "You're going to propose on this veranda, aren't you?" He said, "I was." He turned to look at her. "You have made this significantly less surprising than I intended." She said, "I have been watching you for 9 months. I know when you have decided something." He said, "Is this a problem?" She said, "Absolutely not." She looked at him. "Whenever you're ready." He reached into his jacket pocket. He had the ring, which was not extravagant in the way that some men in his position might have gone, but was exactly right in the way that something chosen for a specific person rather than for effect is always exactly right. It was a stone she had admired once in a museum window, months ago, without realizing he had noticed. Because of course he had noticed. He said, "Rose Adeyemi, everything I have learned about the correct way to do this has come from watching you do everything correctly. I am asking you to let me spend the rest of my life attempting the same standard." She looked at the ring. She looked at him. She said, "That was well said." He said, "I had 7 weeks to practice." She said, "Yes." He said, "Just yes?" She said, "You know everything I mean when I say yes. You have known it for months." He said, "I know." He put the ring on her finger. They sat on the veranda in the Lagos evening, and she leaned against him, and they did not say anything else for a while, because nothing else was necessary. The wedding was 7 months later. It was 2 ceremonies on 2 continents, because this was who they were, people from 2 places who had found something that belonged to both and neither exclusively. Seoul first, a formal ceremony that was attended by the people who mattered in his world, and a subset of hers who made the journey. That was documented in ways that were accurate and warm, and sent a clear signal to every person in the Kang group's various orbits about what was stable and what was protected and what was permanent. Lagos second, larger, louder, full of the particular joy of Rose's family doing what they did, which was celebrated with their whole bodies and their whole voices, and no conception of doing it quietly. Min-ho danced at the Lagos reception in a way that she would later describe only as brave, and which made her laugh so hard she had to hold on to him to stay upright, which she suspected was half the point. Her mother cried. His mother, who had come with the Seoul delegation, cried also, quietly and precisely, in the way she did everything. Director Choi, present in Seoul as part of the security arrangement, allowed himself 1 glass of champagne and 1 private moment of satisfaction that he discussed with nobody. Ji-yeon, who had been invited as a guest, spent the reception in a state of sustained delight that she expressed through a series of increasingly emotional messages to the 12th floor group chat, none of which were professional, and all of which were read with great interest. The following year was the year things continued becoming what they were becoming, which was different from what they had been in the ways that mattered, and the same in the ways that were real. The restructuring continued. Min-ho moved through it with the same patience and deliberateness that he had been applying for 5 years, and with the additional clarity that came from having someone at home who asked good questions and expected honest answers, and had no patience for any version of the story that was less than complete. Rose had transitioned from intern to a formal role in international development strategy that had been created partly, because the work required it, and partly because the Nairobi and Accra contracts she had developed had performed significantly better than projected, and the evidence was conclusive. She was not there because of him. She was there because of the work, and they both held this distinction carefully because it was true, and because it mattered to her, and because things that mattered to her mattered to him. She was 5 months along when the Nairobi contract reached its final phase, which was something she found pleasing from a narrative standpoint, and said so. And Min-ho agreed that the timing was satisfying, and brought her tea without being asked, and did not in any way make her feel like the pregnancy was a reason to do anything differently about the work, which she had been ready to argue about, and found she did not need to. He had been practicing. The morning, she told him, was a Saturday morning in the apartment they had made genuinely and specifically theirs, which looked nothing like the cold expense of minimalism it had started as, and something like a place where two people from different worlds had decided to build a third one together. He was at the kitchen table reading something. She came and sat across from him and put a positive test on the table between them. He looked at it. He looked at her. He set down what he was reading with a care that suggested he needed something to do with his hands. He said, "Are you all right?" She said, "I am extremely all right." He said, "Are you scared?" She said, "Yes." She paused. "Are you?" He said, "Yes." He looked at her. Then he said, "I have been scared before and managed correctly. I intend to do the same." She said, "I know." He came around the table and crouched at her level the way he had crouched on the marble floor of the 12th floor corridor in the very beginning, and he looked at her with the same complete attention. And now she knew all of what was in it, every layer, and she looked back at him and knew that he saw all of her in return. He said, "You are extraordinary." He said it simply, without theater, the way he said true things. She said, "You're not bad yourself." He said, "I love you." She said, "I know." She paused. "I love you too." She had said it before, but she still liked saying it. He put his hand on the side of her face. She turned into it slightly, the way she always did. Outside the apartment, Seoul was starting its day with its usual complete indifference to anything that was not Seoul. Inside, everything was exactly the size of itself, no larger and no smaller, which is what things feel like when they're real. She had dropped a file on his shoes on a Tuesday morning in October, and something had woken up behind his eyes that had no name yet, but already knew hers. It had taken 9 months and 2 continents and several situations she would rather not repeat, and 1 veranda in Lagos, and 2 wedding ceremonies, and 1 Saturday morning with a test on the kitchen table to understand fully what had woken up. It was this. Exactly this. And it was, as she had said once in a conference room at 2 in the morning, with the honest weight of everything fully acknowledged, entirely right.